Hi, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for coming to my talk, which is called DePIN, the Endgame. I want to piggyback off the work that Abhay and Andy spoke about and talk to you a little bit about the very futuristic vision about what DePIN might look like in 10 or 20 years. So why you should care about what I have to say? I am one of the founders of Escape Velocity, or EV3. We are the first DePIN-focused venture fund to launch about 2 years ago. We have backed almost 20 companies in the space around AI, compute, energy, food delivery and logistics, geopositioning, healthcare, 3D printing and manufacturing, post-quantum, and a host of other categories. And we call ourselves DePIN's investor builders. Our model is we invest in these companies and we take the money that we make and we reinvest it into building public goods for the DePIN space. And so we've built media and podcast business and analytics, on-chain analytics tools for the space that Andy showed you, and annual events and other things that help sort of bring the DePIN community together. So I'm going to real quickly revisit, I think, the ancient Greeks used to say that revisiting definitions is the beginning of wisdom. So what is physical infrastructure is the first thing I want to talk about. And it's basically the physical devices that serve the public infrastructure and public goods that we expect to work globally. Your internet, your energy, data, public safety. And so here are some pictures of some of the public infrastructure that was out, that I was able to take pictures of yesterday in Hong Kong alongside the water. So now that we know what physical infrastructure is, the natural question is, what is decentralized physical infrastructure, or DePIN? And I think the best way to explain it is from a book one of our investors wrote, came out recently, Chris Dixon, named Read, Write, Own. He has this analogy of, he says when people ask, what is the use case for a blockchain, it's sort of like going back to the beginning of the 20th century and asking what's the use case for steel. So if you give somebody a block of steel, you can't do much with it, right? You can maybe hit somebody over the head with it, but there's not much you can actually do. It has no utility in itself. But when you think about on a global societal basis, what does steel enable? It enables us to have taller buildings, more ambitious public goods, sort of safer, faster transportation. And so these are all, although the current traditional infrastructure is steel in the actual materials that it's built out of, the networking between them and the way that the devices interact is very weak and fragile and not standardized. And so it's sort of the interactions between them, the networks, are built with wood. And DePIN is a way of building these networks with steel. These pictures are two roller coasters from the amusement park in my hometown in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. We basically had two there that I rode all my childhood. One was built now 100 years ago. It was made of wood. It was terrifying to ride. You felt like you were going to die every time. The other one, Steel Force, was 5 times bigger, much faster. It was built with steel. And this is my visceral example of what networks built with steel enable and why it's so much better. One question we get often about DePIN is, especially here in Hong Kong, for example, it's well, we're sitting here, the lights are working, the air conditioner feels great, our cell phones all work. Why do we actually need DePIN? And the key is that DePIN doesn't solve the infrastructure problems of today. It solves the infrastructure problems of tomorrow. And tomorrow's infrastructure problems are exponentially harder than today's for 3 main reasons: climate, IoT, and AI. On the climate side, the sort of operating conditions that our infrastructure has to survive through are becoming exponentially more volatile and just tougher in general. This chart here on my right side shows the number of days in the city where I was born, in Valencia, Venezuela, that are over 32 degrees Celsius. And you can see in 1996, when I was born, it was roughly 60 days per year that were over 32 degrees Celsius. By the time that I'm 80 years old, roughly, more than half the year, almost 200 days per year, are going to be over 32 degrees Celsius. And so the sort of the environment that our infrastructure has to survive is becoming exponentially harder to manage, and our current infrastructure just isn't going to work. The second driver about why tomorrow's infrastructure problems are so much harder is IoT. It turns out that the number of devices can grow much faster than the number of people in the world, and the number of data and sort of compute that each device has grows even faster than the number of devices. And so we have this massive exponential curve in just the amount of interconnections and data that networks have to manage. And these are just the well-meaning connections. Actually, the third pillar, AI, is creating extremely sophisticated adversarial attacks and spam and other sorts of attackers that are making our networks weaker. And just to give you an example of this, I pulled together a couple examples from just the past 3 months alone of global telecom hacks. And so you can see in the first quarter of this year, telecoms from Taiwan, Paraguay, Uganda, Israel, Australia, the US, Malaysia, and probably many more that we'll never know were all hacked. And again, this is just in the first 3 months of this year alone. And by the way, Helium Mobile was not hacked at all so far, ever. Luckily, there's 1,000 entrepreneurs globally now working on solving these problems. We've seen a couple of these sector maps already. We've been lucky to work with a lot of the founders at an early stage. And everyone is working towards an end vision where everyday consumer or citizens are able to walk around and they're empowered and incentivized to fix the public infrastructure around them and sort of coordinate permissionlessly to fix to maps, energy grids, wireless, all sorts of different types of infrastructure. And so, for today, my talk, I want to talk about like how DePIN's Endgame. How do we know that DePIN has won? Running a venture fund, we get this question from investors often around like, when will you sell tokens? Like at what point has DePIN won so much that you'll sell everything and sort of like go home? My answer is never. We plan to be investing behind this space for many decades. But I think it is a really interesting question about like, what does the world look like when DePIN has won, and what are the markers that we know we've sort of like made it as a space? And so today, one of the philosophies that we have at EV3 as an investment firm is that you don't say anything out loud unless you can be embarrassed to be wrong about it a couple of months or years later. So I wanted to share 5 falsifiable predictions about the future that DePIN is going to provide. The first, I believe the gig economy will become 10% of global GDP, up from 0.5% today. Why? It's because DePIN is just a strictly better employment option for billions of people around the world. If you think about a regular arbitrary human becomes alive today, like how do they interact with the global economy? You can be a full-time employee and basically get stability. You can be sort of like a Web 2 gig economy worker and you can get agency in what you do, but you have no stability and you have no ownership in the business that you're building. You can be a startup employee and you sort of like lose stability, you lose agency, but you have ownership in what you're building and you may get rich. DePIN is the only one that provides sort of like a little bit of all 3 of these, right? You have agency to work on what you want. You have ownership in both the network and your own business. And you also get some stability because you're underwriting core infrastructure. And so I think that DePIN is fundamentally going to sort of like be the right way for a lot of people to earn their living and interact with other people in the world. And as this trend happens, DePIN and the gig economy will converge. And the gig economy will grow, I think 20x as a percentage of the global economy. My second prediction is that DePIN is going to drive retail and wholesale markets to completely converge. And this will sort of be a thing of the past where people won't even know what retail and wholesale markets are. One of the biggest sort of like markers of the problems with infrastructure today and the regulatory moats is that I flew here a couple of days ago. I bought an eSIM as soon as I landed, and it cost me $5 per gigabyte. That eSIM provider that I bought it from probably pays $1 per gigabyte to the local telco. And so there's this massive spread in prices depending on if you're a business or if you're a consumer. The same thing happens in the electricity markets where things are marked up 5 or 6x for retail compared to wholesale markets. And so this will be a thing of the past. In DePIN networks, everyone is just a private key. You're identified by your registration on the network or your public-private key pair. The network doesn't care if you're a retail, a business, an enterprise. Everyone can compete on the same level. And so over the next 10, 15 years, we're going to see a massive collapsing of retail prices of data and of energy and of other commodities. And we'll see a leveling of the playing field with wholesale markets. My third prediction is that nation states will rely on more shared infrastructure built on top of DePIN. When we think about global infrastructure today, there's basically 2 paradigms. There are some types of infrastructure that nation states consider so critical to their sovereignty that they build on their own. So a good example is satellites, right? In the US, we have GPS. Here we have Beidou. In Russia, they have GLONASS. And there's every sort of like major geopolitical power has its own satellite constellation because GPS is such a critical part of military and timekeeping and other very critical things that they considered for their sovereignty. The same thing happens in payments with SWIFT, and here we have SIPs, identity with social security numbers in the States and other systems here. The counterexample to these are shared protocols. For example, the internet with TCP/IP is used everywhere globally. Wi-Fi standards are global standards that can work everywhere. The same with time and UTC and sort of aviation standards. And these all drive massive global industries, and the interoperability is sort of key to us being able to have global air travel and global Wi-Fi devices that work everywhere, and be able to have meetings with people on the other side of the globe and coordinate effectively on time. And so as DePIN recreates sort of everything on the left side of this page, everything will shift over towards shared protocols. There will be a DePIN GPS network, there will be DePIN payments, DePIN identity that is so secure and censorship resistant that governments will be comfortable sharing it even with their adversaries. I think this will probably be the last one to happen. We're sort of starting to see this with Bitcoin happen today. Almost 15 years after inception. I think it'll take a similar amount of time for DePIN. My fourth prediction is that digital commodity markets will flip the traditional commodity markets. Today, when you look at DePIN market cap, it's roughly $75 billion total across all the categories that we mentioned. The nominal value of global commodity markets are 125 trillion. And so there's this 1500x difference between sort of the value that the world has ascribed to these like legacy physical commodities and the next generation of digital commodities. So we think DePIN is going to eat traditional commodities, and these two circles will flip. And it will be a massive both creation and transfer of wealth among many industries that DePIN is disrupting. And my last prediction, one that I share with my partner a lot. It's quite outside DePIN, but I believe that island real estate is actually one of the best non-crypto proxies for DePIN success over the next 15 years. And I think island real estate will outperform stock markets over the next 15 years. Why? Islands are, I think, objectively like some of the best places to live on Earth, but they suffer from terrible infrastructure. Hong Kong and Singapore are sort of the exceptions, but many islands on Earth that are, sort of like the quality of living is so far below where it could be, simply because this problem of nobody's there to invest in the infrastructure because there's not enough people to sort of like justify a third party coming in. And so I think DePIN is going to enable locally owned infrastructure with low fixed costs in a lot of island economies, and islands are going to be sort of like the best test cases for what's possible with DePIN interoperability. And so, let's see here some of my favorite islands, both in like the Web 2 sense, I guess, of Hong Kong and Puerto Rico and Hawaii, Phuket, Indonesia, which I think will see massive growth. And the sort of like crypto native way to play this is some of the like network state or nation state projects that are popping up, like Praxis and Zuzalu and Cabindao, which are trying to recreate new cities, sometimes on islands, sometimes in geographically remote areas, built on top of a lot of decentralized infrastructure. And so yeah, these are the 5 signs of DePIN's Endgame that I wanted to share with you guys today. The gig economy becomes 10% of global GDP. Retail and wholesale commodity markets converge around the world. Nation states rely on shared global infrastructure, even the adversarial ones. Digital commodity markets become even bigger than traditional commodity markets, and island real estate outperforms equities over the next couple of decades. So that's it. Thank you for my talk. I wanted to, this QR code will take you to our site, DePIN Ninja, where we track on-chain analytics for over 1,000 DePIN projects now. You can connect your wallet and contribute to the site. Like I mentioned before, we have a big focus on rewarding sort of folks in our community. So we hope people can contribute to the site and make it a lot better and create more of a public good for DePIN founders and investors and community members. Thank you.